They say the path to hell is paved with good intentions. But sometimes, justice begins not with a revolution, but with the snap of a 10-year-old girl's arm. This is not a fairy tale. There are no heroes in capes here. Just a predator in uniform, a child with a pencil, and a family willing to burn a city to the ground to protect her. Her name is Lily Thorne. She saw what no one was meant to see, and she drew it. Our story begins in the sun-drenched city of Port Sterling, California, a place that sold postcards of peace and prosperity. But beneath the polished veneer, a rot had festered, and at the heart of our story is Lily Thorne. 10 years old, with eyes that didn't just see, they recorded. Lily possessed a mind that was a perfect high-resolution archive, a place where moments were stored not as memories, but as flawless, permanent data. Her sketchbook was the physical manifestation of this gift, where she could download the world with the tip of a pencil. This gift was nurtured by her father, Julian Thorne, a man who was a ghost in his own life. Once the architect of the world's most advanced security and surveillance systems, he had built a tech empire, then vanished into a self-imposed exile of wealth and seclusion. He had seen the darkness that power attracts, and he had built a fortress of privacy around his only daughter, teaching her to observe, to be aware, and to be prepared. He prepared her for everything, except the casual, banal evil she would find in the one place she was supposed to be safe. That place was the Port Sterling Community Center, a building painted in cheerful colors, a supposed sanctuary. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, as Lily sketched the world around her, her focus was drawn to a corner where light and shadow met. There, she saw him. Officer Cade Maddox, a man celebrated in the local papers as a hero, his uniform a constellation of commendations. He was in a hushed, urgent conversation with a man whose face Lily recognized from TV news reports about organized crime. Their exchange was brief, a silent ballet of menace and deceit, culminating in the passing of a thick envelope. It was a moment of profound wrongness, an ugly tear in the fabric of her orderly world. Her mind recorded every detail. The nervous twitch in the criminal's eye, the arrogant confidence of the officer, the way Maddox's hand rested on his holstered weapon, not as a tool of the law, but as a symbol of dominance. Her pencil moved, driven by an instinct she didn't understand, and the damning moment was immortalized on paper. Maddox was a creature of control. His criminal enterprise, hidden behind his badge, thrived on it. When his eyes swept the room and landed on the small, quiet girl with the sketchbook, his internal alarms screamed. He knew who she was. He knew of her father's wealth and her strange, savant-like memory. He saw her looking, and in her innocent gaze, he saw the potential for his own annihilation. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. A witness is a threat. A record is a death sentence. He had to erase it. He waited. He watched her leave. 2 blocks from the safety of her home, his cruiser, a symbol of order, became a predator's tool. It slid to the curb, a shark in the placid waters of suburbia. "That's a nice sketchbook you've got there," he began, his voice a calculated predatory purr. He got out of the car, his presence a wall of intimidation. He demanded to see the drawing. Lily, sensing the shift from authority to aggression, clutched the book to her chest. "It's private," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was the wrong answer. "Private," he sneered, the mask of the friendly officer dissolving into raw menace. "You think because your father is Julian Thorne, you're untouchable? You think you're better than me?" He lunged, his hand a vice on her small wrist. The rage he felt was not just about the drawing. It was about her privilege, her name, her very existence. which he saw as a judgment on his own sordid life. He twisted her arm behind her back, trying to pry the sketchbook free. "You will learn to respect the law," he growled. And then, the sound. A sound that had no place in the golden afternoon sunlight. A sickening, hollow crack. It wasn't loud, but it silenced the world. Lily's scream was pure primal agony. Pain exploded through her arm as she fell to the pavement. The sketchbook flew from her grasp, landing open. The drawing, the two men, the envelope, the conspiracy, lay exposed under the California sky. Maddox stared, his breath catching in his throat. This was no longer containment. This was a catastrophic error. He snatched the single drawing, the source of his panic, and looked at the broken child on the ground. He had to make her disappear. He hauled her into his cruiser and sped to the hospital, his mind a frantic mess of damage control. He deposited her at the emergency room curb like a piece of discarded trash, a nameless victim of an unknown accident. And then he vanished. He thought he had severed his connection to the crime. He was catastrophically wrong. He failed to understand the nature of the man whose daughter he had just crippled. Julian Thorne didn't believe in luck. He believed in preparation. The smartwatch on Lily's wrist was not a toy. It was a lifeline. As the first wave of agony had washed over her, as Maddox's face had loomed above her, her training had taken over. Her fingers, moving by pure instinct, drilled into her by her father, keyed a complex sequence into the watch's bezel. It wasn't a call. It was an activation. A silent digital scream for help that was more potent than any voice. It opened a secure encrypted channel, live streaming everything. The high-fidelity audio of her sobs and his curses, her precise GPS coordinates, and most chillingly, her biometric data. A real-time graph showed her heart rate exploding from a calm 80 to a terror-stricken 190 beats per minute, her cortisol levels flooding her system. All of it was beamed to one person on Earth, her aunt, the formidable former federal prosecutor, Cassandra Thorne. Maddox thought he had silenced a witness. Instead, he had created a perfect, unimpeachable record of his own savagery and delivered it, in real time, into the hands of his worst possible enemy. The game hadn't ended. It had just begun. A line was just crossed that should never be crossed. The shield of authority was used as a weapon against the innocent. If you believe that accountability should be absolute, that no one is above the law, then take a moment to support this message by clicking the like button. It's a silent signal that you stand for justice and that you are watching too. The signal arrived not as a sound, but as a violation. In the quiet, orderly world of Cassandra Thorne's office, the alert on her monitor was a digital scream. It was a torrent of data that told a story of pure terror. She saw the GPS coordinates pinpointing her niece's location on a quiet suburban street. She saw the audio waves of a child's plea turning into a sharp, agonized cry. But it was the biometric feed that stopped her breath. She watched a graph of Lily's heart rate leap from a child's resting pulse to the frantic, panicked rhythm of a hunted animal. She saw the chemical markers of fear flooding her system, a silent biological record of an atrocity. In that moment, Cassie Thorne, the formidable former federal prosecutor, ceased to be an advocate. She became an avenger. There was no panic, no wasted motion. The rage that surged through her was immediately channeled, converted from raw heat into the cold, clean energy of purpose. The years she had spent in the sterile corridors of the Justice Department had taught her one thing: emotion is a liability, but controlled fury is a weapon. She knew the Port Sterling Police Department was not a place to seek justice. It was the place where justice went to die. To report this to them would be to hand the lamb back to the wolf for safekeeping. Her strategy had to be surgical, external, and overwhelming. Her fingers flew across a secure keyboard, dialing a number buried so deep in her contacts, it was almost a memory. One name, Marcus Vance, a detective from the old school, a man drowning in cynicism, but still clinging to the wreckage of his integrity. He had been a young, idealistic cop when Cassie's own father, a legendary lawman, had been his captain. Vance owed her family a debt of honor, a currency he thought had long expired. When he answered, his voice was a gravelly mix of surprise and dread. "Cassie," he began, "I haven't heard from you since you left the circus. This can't be a social call." "It isn't, Marcus," she replied, her voice devoid of warmth, stripped down to pure function. "I need intel. An officer assaulted my niece 10 minutes ago. He broke her arm and dumped her at General Hospital. No report, no call. He's a ghost. I need you to give him a name." A long, heavy sigh came through the phone. It was the sound of a man being asked to step back into a fire he had barely escaped. "Cassie, you have no idea what you're asking. The crews running that part of the city, they aren't just cops. They are a franchise. They have their own rules, their own code of silence. You poke that beast, and it will bite back, hard." "The beast already bit," Cassie retorted, her voice dropping to a dangerous low. "It bit a 10-year-old girl. Are you going to help me, Marcus? Or are you going to tell me to file a complaint that will get shredded before the ink is dry?" This was the call to account. For Vance, it was a choice between a quiet retirement and one last stand for the man he used to be. The debt was being collected. "Give me what you have," he grumbled. "I'll see what I can find. But you need to call your brother. You're going to need more than an old cop for this fight." She had already planned the second call. Contacting her brother, Julian, was like initiating the launch sequence for a nuclear weapon. She dialed. He answered instantly, his voice a calm, digital hum. Cassie laid out the facts with clinical precision, reciting the data from Lily's watch like a charge sheet in a federal court. She detailed the injury, the location, the abandonment. She left out the emotion. He would provide the response. Julian listened in absolute silence. When she finished, there was no gasp, no curse. There was only a pause, a void of chilling stillness. Then he spoke, his voice the sound of a supercomputer calculating a final, inescapable solution. "They have committed an error of category," Julian stated, as if discussing a flaw in a piece of code. "They believe this is a crime of violence. It is not. It is a data breach. They have breached my security perimeter. The consequences will be algorithmic and absolute." He paused. "I am de-indexing this officer from reality, Cassie. I will erase him like a corrupted file. Your job is to find his name. My job is to ensure that by the time you are done with him, the world will have no record that he was ever a man of any consequence." The call ended. Cassie felt a tremor of the immense, terrifying power she had just unleashed. Her mind went back to the moment that had defined her own path, the reason she had abandoned her career. It was a case involving a young artist, an innocent man framed by Maddox's unit in a turf war. She remembered sitting across from the young man after he was convicted on planted evidence, seeing the light in his eyes extinguished by a system that was supposed to protect him. She had vowed that day to never again be a cog in that broken machine. She would be a wrench in its gears. This attack on Lily wasn't just a new crime. It was an echo of an old one. It was a chance for a justice that was long overdue. Her secure phone chimed. It was Vance. "Got him," his message read. Officer Cade Maddox, badge 5372. Publicly, he's a saint. Internally, he's the deputy chief's personal enforcer. He holds court every Sunday night at a steakhouse downtown, the Gilded Bull. They feel safe there. Untouchable. He added one last line. He's not a man, Cassie. He's an apex predator. Don't face him alone. But Cassie knew she wasn't alone. That evening, she walked into the opulent wood-paneled dining room of the Gilded Bull. The air was thick with the smell of expensive steak and cheap arrogance. She saw Maddox in a large booth, holding a glass of whiskey, laughing, his posture expansive and dominant. He was a king in his small, rotten kingdom. Cassie moved through the restaurant, a specter of calm purpose. She stopped at his table. The laughter died. "Officer Maddox," she said. It was not a question. He looked up, his eyes narrowing with irritation. "And you are?" Cassie ignored the question. She placed a sleek, black tablet on the table and slid it towards him. He glanced down, expecting perhaps a photo or a legal document. What he saw defied all logic. It was a live satellite feed, crystal clear, showing a bird's-eye view of his own house, right at that moment. Then, with a tap of her finger, the image changed. It was a file directory. His bank accounts, offshore encrypted, were listed. A folder labeled Communications pulsed ominously. Then, the final image appeared. A high-resolution photo of him in the alley behind the community center that afternoon, taking the envelope. It was time-stamped, geotagged, and flawless. Maddox stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. This wasn't evidence. It was omniscience. It was impossible. "What is this? Who are you?" He choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. Cassie leaned forward, her presence suddenly filling the entire space. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a surgeon's scalpel. "There are 2 mistakes you've made today," she said, her voice a symphony of cold, controlled rage. "The first was that you put your hands on my niece. The second, and far more serious, is that you assumed we would play by your rules. You believe you're part of a system of justice. Let me clarify your position. You are a loose end, a liability in a far larger equation. My family, we're not filing a complaint. We are conducting an audit, and your entire world has just been flagged for liquidation." She turned and walked away, leaving him staring at the tablet, a digital window into his own imminent destruction. The ghost in the system had just delivered her message. The reckoning had officially begun. The chilling silence Cade Maddox was left with in that steakhouse was not the end of a conversation. It was the opening salvo in a war he was psychologically and technologically incapable of fighting. While he sat paralyzed, staring at an image of his own damnation, the architect of that image was already executing the next phase. From a location that existed only as a whisper on the dark web, Julian Thorne began to dismantle the corrupt world of Port Sterling, not with a sledgehammer, but with the focused, invisible power of information. He understood a fundamental truth of the modern age. True power isn't the ability to apply force. It is the ability to control the narrative. The digital portfolio containing the evidence of the assault on Lily was a masterpiece of strategic communication. The raw, emotional audio of Lily's cries was intentionally placed alongside the cold, hard biometric data of her terror. Maddox's redacted complaint history was juxtaposed with the pristine, high-resolution satellite image of his criminal conspiracy. This package was not thrown to the wolves of social media to be torn apart in a chaotic frenzy of outrage. That would be messy, temporary. Julian's plan was permanent. He aimed the portfolio like a guided missile at 3 specific targets. The nation's most tenacious investigative journalist, known for dismantling political careers, the chief legal counsel of the ACLU, who specialized in systemic police misconduct, and the senior policy advisor to a U.S. senator who had built a reputation on crusading against corruption. He wasn't just leaking a story. He was delivering a pre-built, ironclad legal case to the 3 people most capable of weaponizing it. The result was not a firestorm. It was a detonation. By dawn, the story was on every major news network. But it wasn't the story the Port Sterling PD expected. The narrative, expertly shaped by the journalists Julian had chosen, bypassed the simple, sympathetic story of police brutality. Instead, it focused on the chilling question posed by the satellite image. Who was Officer Maddox meeting, and why? The assault on Lily Thorne was presented not as the crime itself, but as the panicked, brutal act of a man trying to cover up a much larger conspiracy. The city's media, taking their cue from the national outlets, began digging into the community center's funding, into Maddox's past arrests, into a web of connections that hinted at a rot that went far deeper than one bad cop. The city of Port Sterling woke up to find itself the subject of a national scandal, its carefully crafted image of peace shattered overnight. As the media machine roared to life, Julian unleashed his masterstroke. He knew that inside every corrupt institution, there are good people trapped in a culture of silence, terrified of the consequences of speaking truth to power. He decided to give them an impenetrable fortress from which to shout. In the dead of night, a new website materialized online. The Sterling Shield. It was an anonymous whistleblower portal, but built with Julian Thorne's paranoid, nation-state-level genius. It featured multi-layered encryption, routed its traffic through a dozen countries, and scrubbed all metadata from submissions, making it a digital ghost. Its homepage bore a simple, powerful promise. They have a blue wall of silence. We are your shield of truth. Tell us what you know. They will never know it was you. It was like opening a pressure valve on a city that had been suffocating for years. The submissions came in a torrent, a digital flood of suppressed conscience. An aging desk sergeant uploaded years of internal reports on Maddox's crew that had been marked unfounded by Deputy Chief Wallace. A young patrol officer, using a burner phone, sent dashcam footage of Maddox intimidating a local business owner, footage that had been ordered erased. A terrified clerk from the city finance department sent photos of a secret ledger detailing off-the-books payments to a select group of officers. The Sterling Shield didn't just collect evidence, it collected a city's worth of pain, anger, and suppressed integrity. At the epicenter of this earthquake was Police Chief Frank Rourke, a man who had navigated his career by treating every crisis as a political problem to be managed. He saw the protests starting to form. He saw his department's name being dragged through the mud on national television, and he did what he always did. He tried to control the bleeding. He held a terse press conference announcing that Officer Maddox had been placed on paid administrative leave, pending a full, impartial, and thorough internal investigation. It was a classic bureaucratic maneuver, a play for time, designed to give the illusion of action while waiting for the public's notoriously short attention span to move on. He fundamentally misread the situation. He thought he was dealing with a media cycle. He was actually dealing with the Thorne family. That afternoon, Cassie Thorne called her own press conference. She stood before a bank of microphones, not as a victim's family member, but as a commander on a battlefield of her own choosing. She was calm, poised, and radiated an aura of absolute control. Yesterday, my 10-year-old niece was brutally assaulted by an officer of the Port Sterling Police Department, she began, her voice clear and strong. Chief Rourke has promised a thorough internal review. I am here today to tell you that this will not be necessary, because a public review has already begun. A wave of murmurs went through the assembled press. This assault was not a random act, Cassie continued, her eyes locking onto the cameras. It was the panicked reaction of a man who is part of a criminal conspiracy that has been operating under the color of law for years. And I know this because for the past 24 hours, the brave and honest employees of this city have been speaking out. She gestured to a large screen behind her, where the logo for the Sterling Shield appeared. This secure platform has received hundreds of verifiable submissions, painting a damning portrait of systemic corruption. Therefore, my family is today launching the Thorn Initiative, a new heavily funded foundation whose sole purpose is to provide the legal, financial, and technological resources for any citizen or official to safely expose corruption. We will be the sword and the shield for the powerless. She let that sink in before delivering the final devastating blow. So, to Chief Rourke and the city of Port Sterling, let me be clear. We are not asking for justice. We are not demanding an investigation. We are announcing one. The Thorn Initiative, in partnership with the brave whistleblowers of this city, is conducting a full, public and transparent audit of your department. And we have the evidence, we have the resources, and we have the will to see it through to the end. It was a declaration of war. She had bypassed the mayor, the police chief, and the entire city government. She had deputized the citizens themselves. The digital tsunami Julian had unleashed now had a face, a voice, and a name, and it was coming for them all. It's a timeless question. What truly creates change? Is it the roar of the crowd in the streets, demanding action from the outside? Or is it the quiet, courageous whisper of a whistleblower from the inside, armed with the truth? Let us know what you think in the comments section below. Your perspective matters. In the sterile, soundproofed conference room, deep within the Port Sterling Police Headquarters, a different kind of war council was being held. The panic that had rippled through the lower ranks did not exist here. Here, there was only the cold, hard calculus of survival. At the head of the table sat Deputy Chief Wallace, the true architect of the city's shadow government. He was not a simple thug like Maddox. He was a chess master who saw the city as his board, and he had just watched Cassie Thorne execute a brilliant, unexpected move. He listened to the reports of the Sterling Shield, of the media frenzy, of the federal whispers, and he did not flinch. He recognized the threat for what it was: existential. The Thorns were not aiming for reform. They were aiming for annihilation, and Wallace's response would be equally absolute. They are fighting a war of information, Wallace stated to his trusted inner circle, his voice a low, confident hum. They believe truth is their most powerful weapon. We are about to teach them that a more powerful, more believable lie can burn the truth to ashes. We cannot match Julian Thorne's resources. We cannot silence his sister. So, we will not attack them. We will attack their credibility. We will take their greatest strength, technology, and we will forge it into a weapon that hangs Julian Thorne in the court of public opinion. The plan he laid out was not one of defense. It was a scorched earth offensive of breathtaking audacity. They would not deny the corruption. They would eclipse it with a far greater crime. They would frame Julian Thorne as a monster. Wallace activated his most valuable and most deniable asset, a crew of mercenary hackers based in Eastern Europe. digital ghosts who specialized in destabilization and misinformation for the highest bidder. Their contract was simple: bring the city of Port Sterling to its knees and leave Julian Thorne's digital DNA at the scene of the crime. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the city began to break. The attack was not a single event. It was a symphony of chaos. The centralized traffic grid failed, turning major intersections into demolition derbies of screeching tires and shattering glass. The power flickered and died in 3 residential districts, plunging 50,000 people into darkness and fear. The city's main financial servers at the municipal bank triggered a lockdown, freezing transactions and seeding panic in the markets. But this was just the distraction. As city engineers scrambled in a state of confusion, the hackers performed their true work. They penetrated the city's core network and planted their masterpiece, a complex worm that carried the digital signature of a proprietary encryption algorithm Julian Thorne had designed for his own company years ago. It was his unique, unforgeable fingerprint, now smeared all over the scene of a massive cybercrime. The trap was set. The narrative pivot was executed with chilling precision. An anonymous source from within the mayor's office leaked to a national wire service that the attack was not random. It was targeted, sophisticated, and the digital evidence pointed to a single, terrifying suspect: the brilliant, reclusive, and now seemingly unhinged billionaire, Julian Thorne. The story was irresistible. The grieving father had become the domestic terrorist. The righteous vigilante had become the villain. Headlines shifted overnight. The Thorne retribution, justice or terror. Port Sterling held hostage by billionaire's private war. The FBI, responding to a direct request from the governor, descended on Port Sterling. But they weren't there to investigate police corruption. They were there to hunt a cyber terrorist, armed with a federal warrant granted on the strength of the flawlessly forged digital evidence. They did what Wallace had predicted. They legally and systematically dismantled Julian Thorne's empire. His bank accounts were frozen. His access to his satellite networks was severed by court order. His communication arrays were shut down. The man who could watch the world from his sanctuary was now trapped inside it, blinded, silenced, and cut off from the very power that made him a threat. The phone call from Detective Marcus Vance was a lifeline of truth in a sea of lies. "It's the Wallace playbook, Cassie," he said, his voice heavy with the ghosts of past battles. "They're not just framing him. They're running a signature move." He then told her a story she'd never known, of a bright, ambitious city councilman named Richards, who, a decade earlier, had launched an audit into the department's bloated budget. 2 weeks into his audit, Vance recounted grimly, the feds got a tip about Richards being involved in an illegal import scheme. The evidence was pristine: shipping manifests, bank transfers, all digital, all fake. It destroyed him. They didn't have to threaten him or hurt him. They just created a more interesting story, and the system did the rest. They buried him under the weight of a lie. That's what they're doing to your brother. Cassie stood in the center of her office, the city lights twinkling outside her window. Each light a reminder of the city her brother was now accused of attacking. The crushing weight of the situation settled upon her. Julian was neutralized. The public, once their greatest ally, was now a jury being fed a steady diet of poison. The very federal government she had once served was now the unwitting instrument of her enemy's design. She was alone. The war of technology was lost. They had been outmaneuvered, their own strengths turned against them with diabolical genius. In that moment of profound isolation, a new clarity emerged from the despair. They had been beaten in the world of data, of servers and satellites, but conspiracies, no matter how technologically advanced, are still run by people. People who have fears, people who have weaknesses, people who make mistakes. She couldn't fight the digital ghost Wallace had created, but she could hunt the human being who had been paid to release it. The fight was no longer about overwhelming force. It was now about finding one small, terrified man in a city of millions. The Empire had struck back and had seemingly won. But Cassie Thorne was about to remind them that a desperate prosecutor with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous hunter of all. A perfect frame-up. A hero turned into a villain. A system turned against itself. For any other family, this would have been the end. But the Thornes were not any other family. And when you push a true fighter into a corner, you haven't trapped them. You have simply focused all of their power onto a single point. And Cassie was about to aim that power at the one crack in her enemy's armor. In the digital war, the Thorne family had been outmaneuvered. Their technology was neutralized, their credibility was shattered, and their patriarch was caged within a fortress of lies. But the war was not over. It simply shifted battlefields. It moved from the cold, sterile world of servers and satellites to a cramped, cluttered office overflowing with paper files, smelling of stale coffee and old secrets. It moved to the world of Detective Marcus Vance. Here, Cassie Thorne, stripped of her brother's omniscient power, began the real fight. This would not be a war of overwhelming force. It would be a hunt, patient and precise, for a single human heart, and the fear and guilt she knew was hiding inside it. She and Vance abandoned the headlines and the FBI's flawed investigation. They turned their full attention back to the one untainted source of truth they possessed, the trove of whistleblower data from the Sterling Shield. They were no longer looking for crimes. They were looking for a ghost, not a digital ghost, but a human one. A person with the unique intersection of technical skill, moral compromise, and profound vulnerability. A person Deputy Chief Wallace could trust to execute a high-stakes frame-up, but who would also be the conspiracy's single point of failure. For 2 days, they lived in a blur of caffeine and obsession. They cross-referenced personnel files with financial discrepancies. They connected anonymous complaints about shakedowns in the East Precinct with IT department service logs. It was painstaking, analog work, connecting threads that no algorithm would ever see. They were searching for a shadow, and then, in the early hours of the second day, Vance found a faint outline, a name, Leo Grady. On paper, he was a nobody, a mid-level IT technician fired from his city job a year ago for a minor infraction. But 3 separate, seemingly unrelated tips, when placed together, told a new story. The first, from a disgruntled former colleague, mentioned Grady's unbelievable programming skills. The second, from a low-level accountant, flagged a series of untraceable cash deposits into Grady's bank account starting shortly after he was fired. The third, a single line from a patrol officer complaining about Maddox's crew, read, "They even have their own pet hacker now, some fired guy named Leo." That was it. The ghost had a name, Leo Grady. Skilled, disgraced, and now secretly wealthy. He was the perfect tool. He was the weak link. Finding him was a matter of simple old-school surveillance. He was living in a drab, anonymous apartment complex on the edge of the city, a man trying desperately not to be seen. When Cassie and Vance appeared at his door, the look on Leo's face was not one of confusion. It was the terrified, soul-sick look of a man who had been waiting for the devil to finally come and collect his due. They didn't force their way in. They let the weight of their presence pull them inside. Leo Grady sat hunched on his cheap sofa, a man physically shrinking into himself. He was trembling, a nervous energy radiating from him. "I want a lawyer," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. Cassie stood in the center of the room, her eyes taking in everything. "You are well within your rights to ask for one, Leo," she said, her voice unexpectedly calm, measured. "And that lawyer will give you sound advice. He will tell you to say nothing. He will tell you to wait as the FBI completes its investigation into my brother, an investigation built on the cyber attack you perpetrated. And when their forensic teams inevitably trace the breach back to your digital signature, and they will, your employers at the PD will offer you up as the sole perpetrator. They will paint you as a disgruntled employee who acted alone. Deputy Chief Wallace will express his profound shock and disappointment, and you will be charged as a domestic terrorist. You will die in a concrete box, Leo. That is the future your silence and a lawyer will buy you." Leo's face, already pale, turned ashen. He began to stutter, to deny, but Cassie held up a hand, silencing him. Vance remained by the door, a silent, imposing monolith of consequence. "I am not here to threaten you, Leo," Cassie continued, her tone shifting. This was no longer an interrogation. It was a deprogramming. "I am here to offer you a different future. I know about your skills. I know Wallace and his crew saw your talent and exploited your weakness. They offered you money and a sense of belonging, and in return, you gave them your gift. You used it to help them hide their crimes, and then you used it to frame an innocent man." She took a step closer. On the mantelpiece, amongst the clutter, was a framed photo of Leo with a smiling young girl, his daughter. Cassie's eyes locked onto it for a moment before returning to him. "But this is what you signed up for. This is the cost of their protection." She pulled out her phone. She didn't show him evidence of his own crime. She showed him the image of the hospital X-ray of Lily's fractured arm. The clean, brutal break in the bone was stark and undeniable. "This is the work of the men you protect," she said softly, but her voice carried the weight of a physical blow. "This is the arm of a 10-year-old girl. Her name is Lily. She likes to draw. An officer of the law did this to her because she saw something she shouldn't have. The man who ordered you to frame my brother is the same man who ensures this officer will never face consequences. You are the digital shield for men who break children's bones." She watched his eyes flicker from the X-ray on her phone to the smiling picture of his own daughter on the mantelpiece. In that moment, the entire construct of his loyalty to Wallace, built on fear and greed, began to crumble. Cassie saw the crack in his soul. "They will sacrifice you, Leo. That is a certainty," she pressed, her voice filled with a powerful, urgent empathy. "But you have one moment right now to choose what you are sacrificed for. Will you be a footnote in their conspiracy, the pathetic fall guy, or will you be the man who brought down an empire of corruption? The man who stood up, told the truth, and ensured the people who did this," she gestured again to the X-ray, "could never hurt another child again. You have one chance to decide who you are. One chance to be the man your daughter believes you to be." It was too much. The weight of his guilt, the terror of his future, and the stark moral choice laid bare before him broke Leo Grady. A raw, guttural sob escaped his lips. The dam of denial and fear burst, and the truth came flooding out in a torrent of choked, desperate words. "I didn't want to. They made me," he wept. "They have everything, a record of it all. I built it for them. A fully encrypted server, hidden behind a proxy network. It has the payments, the orders from Wallace, the blackmail files, everything. They thought it made them invincible. He looked up at Cassie, his face a mask of misery and desperation. "I can give it to you. I can give you everything." In that moment, the war was won. Leo Grady, the human element, the flawed and frightened pawn, had just handed Cassie Thorne the master key to the entire kingdom. He had become the ghost in their machine. Cassie looked at Vance, and for the first time in days, a look of grim, absolute certainty passed between them. The hunt was over. Justice was coming. A single confession, a single act of courage born from guilt and fear. In that small, unassuming apartment, the tide of a war had just turned. The perfect frame-up had been broken by an imperfect man. Now, armed with the ultimate truth, Cassie Thorne was no longer on the defensive. She was about to unleash a legal and moral firestorm from which there would be no escape. The takedown was imminent. Leo Grady's confession was not a key. It was a battering ram. The moment Cassie Thorne walked out of his apartment with the location of the encrypted ledger, the war was effectively over. All that remained was the unconditional surrender. She delivered the intelligence not to the local FBI field office, which was still chasing the ghost of the cyber-terrorist frame-up, but directly to the office of the U.S. Attorney General. What followed was an exercise in overwhelming federal power, executed with the speed and precision of a military operation. There were no leaks. There were no warnings. There was only the dawn. As the sun rose over Port Sterling, so did a new era of accountability. Elite FBI tactical teams, operating with sealed federal warrants, descended upon the city like a righteous storm. They didn't knock. They breached. They found Deputy Chief Wallace in his sprawling suburban home, a self-styled king about to be dragged from his castle. They found Cade Maddox sleeping the untroubled sleep of a man who believed he was above consequences. They swept up the entire inner circle of the conspiracy in a single coordinated purge, pulling them from their homes and offices before the city had even had its morning coffee. The looks on their faces were not of anger, but of sheer, uncomprehending shock. Their world, built on a foundation of fear and impunity, had been dismantled while they slept. The untouchables had been touched. The trial of Cade Maddox was a formality, a public exorcism of the city's demons. He sat in the courtroom, a deflated, hollowed-out version of the predator who had terrorized a child. The prosecution, armed with the irrefutable evidence from the ledger and the powerful testimony of other victims unearthed by the Thorne Initiative, painted a portrait not of a good cop who made one mistake, but of a career criminal who had worn a badge as a disguise. When the judge handed down the sentence, the maximum allowable by law, not just for the assault, but for decades of racketeering and conspiracy, a quiet, cathartic sigh swept through the packed courtroom. It was the sound of a city breathing free for the first time in a generation. But the Thorne family knew that jailing the jackals did not tear down the jungle they hunted in. True victory was not personal. It had to be systemic. The fall of Wallace's regime led to the Port Sterling Police Department being placed under a sweeping federal consent decree, a legal mechanism that put the entire department under the direct supervision of the Department of Justice. It mandated a complete overhaul of training, policies, and, most importantly, culture. The old ways were officially dead and buried under the weight of federal law. And in a move that stunned City Hall, Cassie Thorne leveraged the family's immense influence to ensure that the Sterling Shield, the anonymous whistleblower portal her brother had created, was not shut down. Instead, it was formally adopted by the city, funded by a protected municipal bond, and run by an independent civilian oversight board. The digital tool of a private war had become a permanent public utility of democracy. It was a lasting testament that the voices of the honest would now have a fortress from which to speak truth to power, forever. The story could have ended there, with justice served and a city on the mend. But the Thorns understood that what happened in Port Sterling was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a national disease. Their victory was not a conclusion, it was a blueprint. The Thorn Initiative was launched onto the national stage, not as a charity, but as a machine. It was a new model for fighting corruption, a revolutionary hybrid of Cassie's ferocious legal acumen, Julian's unparalleled technological arsenal, and the unwavering moral clarity born from Lily's ordeal. They began taking on cases across the country, dismantling other corrupt networks with the same terrifying efficiency they had demonstrated in their own city. They were no longer just a family seeking justice. They had become an institution. The final scene of this saga takes place 6 months later, far from a courtroom or a police station. It unfolds on the brightly lit stage of a university auditorium, filled with the nation's most promising young minds. At the center of the stage stands Julian Thorn, flanked by Cassie and a radiant, confident Lily. Julian, the man who had hidden from the world for a decade, was public once more, not as a billionaire, but as a founder. He was there to launch the Thorn Scholars Program, a national fund to sponsor the education of a new generation of lawyers, journalists, and technologists dedicated to public service and systemic reform. He stepped to the podium, his voice calm and resonant, carrying a weight of experience that held the entire audience captive. "We live in an age of sophisticated evil," he began. "It no longer requires brute force. It thrives in the shadows of complex systems, in the ones and zeros of a digital world, and behind the shields of institutions we are taught to trust. We were confronted by this evil, and we learned that to fight it, good must become more sophisticated. It is not enough to be angry. You must be smarter. It is not enough to protest. You must have a better strategy. It is not enough to have the will. You must have the tools." He paused, his eyes finding his daughter in the front row. "We learned that the most advanced surveillance system in the world is no match for the simple courage of a child who refuses to be silenced. And the most powerful force for change is a family that channels its pain into a purpose." As the audience rose to its feet in a wave of thunderous applause, Lily opened her sketchbook. On a clean page, she had drawn a new picture. It was not of a crime or a monster. It was a sketch of the university stage, with a crowd of hopeful faces looking up, and in the sky above them, a shining, protective shield. This story began with a fracture, a moment of profound breakage, but it ends with the construction of something new, something stronger. It proves that the deepest corruption can be unearthed, the most powerful tyrants can be toppled, and the most broken systems can be rebuilt. The Thorn family's journey is a powerful, enduring reminder that while darkness may be cunning and deep, it cannot extinguish the light of a few determined souls who have the courage to fight back, not just for themselves, but for a world they believe is still possible. As we come to the end of our time together, what remains? Beyond the stories of distant lands and battles fought long ago, what is the echo that stays with us? It's the quiet truth that for so many of our veterans, the most challenging war wasn't fought overseas. It began the day they came home. They stepped off a plane and back into a world that had kept spinning without them, a world that couldn't possibly understand the one they had just left. They carry a rucksack that no one can see, filled with the weight of memories, the faces of fallen friends, and the echoes of impossible choices made in moments of profound pressure. This is not a burden of shame. It is a burden of honor. It is the price they pay for their loyalty, for their courage, and for a sacred covenant they made with their comrades and their country. Their sacrifice wasn't a single moment in time. For many, it is a daily act of resilience. It's the quiet grace of a man who wakes from a nightmare but still gets up to make his family breakfast. It's the fierce determination of a woman who channels her military discipline into building a small business, becoming a pillar of her community. It's the veteran who sees a young person struggling and becomes the mentor they never had. This is not the story of brokenness. This is the story of an unbreakable spirit. It is the testament that the same character forged in the fires of adversity can be used to build a life of profound meaning, purpose, and service right here at home. So, what does their story ask of us? It asks for something deeper than a simple, "Thank you for your service." It asks for our understanding. It asks for our respect. The kind of respect that sees the whole person, not just the uniform they once wore. The next time you see a veteran in the grocery store, at a ball game, or sitting quietly in a park, take a moment. Look past the politics, past the headlines, and see the individual. See the quiet strength in their eyes. Recognize that you are looking at someone who has lived a chapter of life that most of us will only ever read about. They don't ask for our pity. They have earned our respect. They don't need us to solve their problems, but they deserve a community that is willing to listen, to learn, and to welcome them home, not just once, but every single day. Their legacy is not written only on stone memorials. It is written in the quiet strength of our communities, in the freedoms we too often take for granted, and in the character of a nation that is at its best when it honors its commitments. They stood for us, and our greatest tribute is to stand for them and for each other, with that same sense of duty, honor, and humanity. The music swells gently, becoming more hopeful and inspiring. If these stories of honor, sacrifice, and incredible resilience have touched your heart today, we invite you to become part of our community. Please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you help us continue to bring these important stories to light and create a space where respect and understanding can grow. Thank you for watching.